She orchestrated prison breaks, commanded armies at 60 years old, negotiated with Spain for military intervention, and terrified English administrators so thoroughly they called her a cruel, bloody woman. Yet when we tell the story of Ireland's 9 Years' War, that last desperate attempt to preserve Gaelic civilization, we credit her son Red Hugh O'Donnell as the great resistance leader. The truth is far more complex. The real architect of Ulster's resistance wasn't the charismatic young lord who escaped Dublin Castle in a blizzard. It was his mother, a Scottish noblewoman known only by her Irish nickname, Iníon Dubh, the Dark Daughter. Her story isn't just another case of a woman erased from history, it's the story of how Victorian prudishness and nationalist myth-making conspired to hide the fact that the most sophisticated political operator in 16th century Ireland was a woman who understood that sometimes violence wasn't just necessary, it was the only language the colonisers understood. Born Fionnghuala Nic Domhnaill around 1565, she entered the world as Scottish nobility. Her father, James MacDonald, was 6th Chief of Donegal, controlling the Isle of Islay and commanding the fearsome Gallowglass warriors of Clan Donald. Her mother, Lady Agnes Campbell, was daughter to the Earl of Argyll. This wasn't some minor Highland family. The MacDonalds were power brokers who could field thousands of mercenary soldiers across the Irish Sea. Young Fionnghuala would have grown up at the Stuart court, educated in languages, statecraft, and the brutality of Scottish court politics during Mary Queen of Scots' tumultuous reign. But childhoods ended abruptly in the 16th century. When she was perhaps 4 or 5 years old, her father was killed by the Irish warlord Shane O'Neill at the Battle of Glentasy in May 1565. It left her mother a widow with a young daughter and a clan's military assets, but no male heir. What Agnes Campbell did next would reshape Irish history. Rather than remarrying into Scottish nobility, she engineered a double marriage alliance with Ulster. She herself would marry Turlough Luinish O'Neill, the new Lord of Tyrone, bringing 1,200 Gallowglass fighters as her dowry. Her daughter would marry Hugh McManus O'Donnell, Lord of Tyrconnell. Of course, for a 5-year-old girl, this meant merely a long engagement lawfully called a marriage, but not consummated. Hugh McManus O'Donnell was approximately 49 years old when he married Iníon Dubh in 1569. That's a 45-year age gap. This wasn't unusual for political marriages, where daughters were treaty documents written in flesh. What was unusual was what happened next. This child bride didn't remain a powerless pawn. She brought her own military force, 100 Scottish warriors who became her permanent bodyguard at Mongavlin Castle. By 1572, when she was perhaps 12 years old, English officials were already nervously noting her growing power over her husband. A child married to a man old enough to be her grandfather in a foreign country, surrounded by potential enemies, began to thrive. She could have retreated into victimhood or accepted powerlessness. Instead, she studied, she learned, she built alliances. She had 8 children, 4 sons and 4 daughters, and she used motherhood not as retreat from power, but as its foundation. By the 1580s, as her husband aged and weakened, Iníon Dubh wasn't just his wife, she was the de facto ruler of Tyrconnell. Contemporary Gaelic sources struggle to categorise her. Lugaid Ó Clírig, writing shortly after these events, captured the contradiction she represented. Though she was calm and very deliberate and much praised for her womanly qualities, she had the heart of a hero and the mind of a soldier. That phrase, womanly qualities alongside heart of a hero, reveals how even sympathetic observers couldn't quite reconcile female power with their worldview. But Iníon Dubh's greatest achievement wasn't military, it was the prison break that changed Irish history. In September 1587, Lord Deputy John Perrott had lured her 15-year-old son Hugh Roe aboard a merchant ship with promises of Spanish wine, then kidnapped him to Dublin Castle. The English strategy was simple: remove the O'Donnell heir, prevent the O'Neill-O'Donnell alliance that could threaten English rule, and leave Tyrconnell leaderless when old Hugh McManus died. For 5 years, Iníon Dubh orchestrated increasingly desperate rescue attempts. She offered English authorities 25 Spanish Armada survivors who'd washed up in Donegal as ransom. The English took the prisoners, executed them all, and kept her son. She offered a £2,000 bribe, an enormous sum representing years of Tyrconnell's income. The money was accepted. Hugh Roe remained imprisoned. But while working to free her son, Iníon Dubh was simultaneously preventing Tyrconnell from collapse. The first threat came from Hugh Gavilar McShane O'Donnell, who had already murdered her brother Alistran in 1586 and had strong claims through the tanistry system of succession. She solved that problem brutally in May 1588, having him shot to pieces by her Scottish guards when he visited Mongavlin. The Annals of the Four Masters, our primary Gaelic source, records what happened next with striking matter-of-factness, when she took out another rival claimant. Iníon Dubh gathered her Scottish mercenaries and, in the chronicle's words, begged and requested of them to fulfil their promise. They surrounded Hugh MacAdegany and, to quote directly, proceeded to shoot at him with darts and bullets until they left him lifeless. This wasn't poison in his wine or a knife in the dark. This was a military execution, ordered by a woman who commanded such loyalty from professional soldiers that they would commit murder on her word. The second rival was her own stepson, Donald O'Donnell, who began gathering support in 1590, arguing that with Hugh Roe imprisoned and likely dead, and Hugh McManus senile, he should inherit. Iníon Dubh didn't wait for his rebellion to grow. She preemptively struck in September 1590, personally leading forces to Deir Lahan, where she defeated and killed him. By eliminating these rivals while Hugh Roe was imprisoned, she ensured there would be no contested succession when he returned. The alliance with Hugh O'Neill was even more complex. O'Neill had initially been hostile to the O'Donnells. He'd actually helped the English capture Hugh Roe in 1587. But Iníon Dubh recognised that Ulster's survival required O'Neill and O'Donnell cooperation. She used her Scottish connections as leverage, controlling the mercenary pipeline O'Neill needed. She negotiated a marriage between O'Neill's daughter and her son Hugh Roe, though the marriage wouldn't occur until after the escape. Most crucially, she convinced O'Neill that Lord Deputy Perra's kidnapping of Hugh Roe was just the beginning of a strategy to eliminate all Gaelic lords. By 1591, she'd transformed O'Neill from an English ally who'd helped capture her son into someone willing to pay £1,000 in bribes to free him. The successful escape on Christmas night. 1591 saw Hugh Roe and two companions crawl through Dublin Castle's sewage system and flee through a blizzard that killed Art O'Neill and cost Hugh Roe his toes to frostbite. When he returned to Tyrconnell in early 1592, he found no rival claimants alive to challenge him, a functioning government his mother had maintained despite his father's senility, and an alliance with the most powerful lord in Ulster already negotiated. Within months of his return in early 1592, Iníon Dubh engineered her elderly husband's abdication. The inauguration of Hugh Roe as the O'Donnell on May 3, 1592, was, in historian Hiram Morgan's words, a stage-managed affair in which the influence of his mother was paramount. Contemporary observer Lua O'Clariach was even more explicit, calling her the head of advice and counsel of the Cenel Connail. Not an advisor, not an influence. The head. This is where the historical erasure becomes most glaring. The 9 Years' War that followed from 1594 to 1603 is presented as Hugh O'Neill and Hugh Roe O'Donnell's resistance against English conquest, but who maintained the Scottish mercenary pipeline that provided Ulster's military backbone? Who controlled Tyrconnell's finances that funded the war? Who negotiated with Spain for the military intervention that nearly succeeded? Contemporary English sources knew exactly who they were fighting. Protestant Archbishop Mila McGrath described Iníon Dubh in 1593 as a cruel, bloody woman who has committed sundry murders. Sir Henry Dockwra considered her capture in 1601 significant enough to report directly to London. These weren't men who would notice, much less fear, a mere mother or wife. They feared her because she was dangerous, a woman who could field armies, who had connections from Edinburgh to Madrid, who had already proven she would kill anyone who threatened her family's power. The war initially went well for the Irish. At the Battle of the Yellow Ford in August 1598, O'Neill's forces destroyed an English army, killing Marshal Henry Bagenal and half his 4,000 men. It remains the greatest defeat England ever suffered in Ireland. Spanish intervention was promised. Philip II had already sent 2 armadas against England and was preparing a 3rd for Ireland. Everything hinged on maintaining unity and Spanish support arriving at the right place. But by 1600, the tide was turning. Lord Mountjoy implemented a scorched earth policy that would kill 60,000 people in Ulster through engineered famine. Sir Henry Dockwra established a garrison at Derry, splitting Ulster's defences. Most critically, in October 1600, Niall Garb O'Donnell, Iníon Dubh's own son-in-law, married to her daughter Nuala, defected to the English. And on top of this, although by this point he wasn't even a figurehead, her husband finally passed away in the same year. Here's where Iníon Dubh's story becomes truly remarkable. Rather than retreating as the war turned against them, this woman, now in her 60s, took direct military command. Hugh Roe appointed her governor of Sligo Castle in summer 1601, placing her in charge of a strategic garrison. When Dockwra captured her at Colony Castle that October, it was significant enough that English command viewed it as a major victory. She was imprisoned during the catastrophic Battle of Kinsale on Christmas Eve 1601, where English cavalry routed the combined Irish-Spanish force in 30 minutes. The Spanish, who had finally arrived with 3,500 troops but landed in the wrong place, surrendered and went home. Hugh Roe, desperate for more Spanish aid, sailed to Spain, where he died in September 1602, possibly poisoned by English agent James Blake, though that remains disputed. Released in December 1602 after her son Rory submitted to the English, Iníon Dubh lived to see the complete destruction of her world. The Treaty of Mellifont in 1603 technically allowed the earls to keep their lands but stripped them of real power. By 1607, both O'Neill and Rory O'Donnell fled Ireland in the flight of the earls. Choosing exile over slow strangulation under English law, Rory died in Rome in 1608. All 4 of Iníon Dubh's sons were dead. But even in defeat, even with her children dead and her world destroyed, Iníon Dubh had one last card to play. Her treacherous son-in-law, Niall Garb, who'd betrayed the cause in 1600, was implicated in Sir Cahir O'Doherty's 1608 rebellion. She provided testimony that proved decisive in his conviction. He was sent to the Tower of London, where he died after 18 years of imprisonment. Even in her 70s, even after losing everything, she could still destroy her enemies. She likely died around 1611, possibly at Kilmacrennan, the ancient inauguration site of the O'Donnells. Her last documented appearance was receiving land in the plantation of Ulster, the colonial project that distributed O'Donnell territories to Scottish and English Protestant settlers. The woman who'd commanded armies and negotiated with European powers died as a minor landowner in a colony built on her family's graves. So why don't we know her name? Why do we learn about Red Hugh's heroic escape from Dublin Castle, but not about the mother who orchestrated his rise? The erasure of Iníon Dubh reflects multiple historical failures. Victorian historians, both English and Irish, couldn't reconcile female violence with their notions of feminine virtue. A woman who ordered executions, who led armies, who played politics with the ruthlessness required for survival, she had to be either erased or transformed into a Lady Macbeth figure, all ambition and malice. Irish nationalist mythology needed male heroes, not female strategists. The story of brave Red Hugh O'Donnell escaping through a blizzard to lead his people against English oppression was perfect for the narrative of masculine resistance. His mother pulling the strings, eliminating rivals, maintaining the alliance that made resistance possible, that complicated the story. It suggested that Irish resistance wasn't just about brave warriors, but about political calculation, strategic marriage, and yes, sometimes murder. Even modern histories often reduce her to Red Hugh's mother or wife of Hugh O'Donnell, when contemporary sources explicitly called her the head of advice and counsel. We know she commanded troops independently. We know she controlled finances. We know she maintained international networks. We know English administrators feared her specifically, not just as an extension of male relatives. The Dark Daughter teaches us that history is written not just by the victors, but by those who fit comfortable narratives. A young man escaping prison in a blizzard, heroic. His mother orchestrating assassinations to clear his path to power, uncomfortable. A lord leading armies against English conquest, admirable. His mother maintaining the Scottish mercenary pipeline that made resistance possible. Too complicated for the mythology. But real history is complicated. Real resistance requires more than heroes. It requires strategists, financiers, diplomats. Iníon Dubh was all of these. She was the architect of the last great Gaelic resistance to English conquest. She deserves more than a nickname in the margins of her son's story. She deserves to be remembered for what she was, one of the most formidable political operators of the 16th century, who happened to be a woman in a world that couldn't quite accept what that meant. The English were right to fear her. She was exactly what they said. A woman who would order executions, who would lead armies, who would do whatever was necessary to protect her family's power, but that's precisely why we should remember her, not as a hero or a villain, but as someone who shows us what the end of a civilization actually looked like for those living through it. The Dark Daughter reminds us that history isn't made just by the people we're comfortable celebrating. It's made by people who faced impossible choices with imperfect solutions. It's made by women whose names get forgotten because their actions don't fit our narratives. It's made by the defeated as much as the victors, and understanding them, really understanding them, not romanticizing or demonizing them, is the only way we truly understand the past. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any new documentaries.